This morning's scripture is Revelation chapter 2, verse 8 through 11. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt at all by the second death. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Dan. Let me ask you a question. Let's say I wanted to make some orange juice today, and I had a pile of oranges here. What would I have to do in order to get the juice out? Squeeze them. Huh? Cut them in half. Chop them up. Squeeze them. Crush them. Basically destroy them in order to get the juice out, right? Back in Jesus' day, one of the things that was a commodity that they used over and over again for many different things was oil. And they would have to do the same thing to olives. They would have to squeeze them. They would have to crush them in order to get the oil out of the olives. Now back then they used oil for all kinds of stuff. They would burn it. They used it in their foods. They used it for cooking. They even used it for healing. Like an ointment type of thing. And they would put them in a press and they would squeeze them until there was nothing left. Well, friends, let me introduce you to the church of Smyrna. Because that church was squeezed until there was basically nothing left. Let's talk about the players in the church of Smyrna. This is one photograph of what's there today. I didn't put together a whole series of photographs. This basically gives you a clear shot of most of what's left there. There were many different players in this church in Smyrna, this church that Jesus dictated this second letter to. See, in this series we're talking about the letters in Revelation where Jesus appeared to the disciple John and said, hey, I want you to write a letter to these churches. I got something to tell them. So what took place here was Jesus looked at the church in Smyrna and says, I have a few words to share with you. All kind of players there. Many of them were martyrs. Unfortunately, Smyrna was one of these situations where in order to be a Christian there, in order to follow the faith there, it really, literally could cost you your life, or your family's life, your children's lives, and there was nothing gracious about it. It was a very difficult, harsh place to stand up for your faith in Jesus. Very difficult place. We were talking a little bit earlier today in the life group that we do at 9 o'clock. We're studying the Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. And you never know where life's going to take you. You never know what circumstances are going to be there. And that was the situation here with the church in Smyrna. They were being persecuted to a degree that you and I will probably never understand because we've never been there. But the persecution there was severe. So there are all kinds of martyrs in the church of Smyrna. There was a bishop there. His name was Polycarp. He's very well known in the Christian church as one of the leaders that helped develop those 7 churches and many other house churches. Polycarp was a man that always believed in God, always believed in the God of Israel, and when Jesus came along, he said, there's the Messiah, I believe and I trust. and he ended up being a bishop in the church of Smyrna. Well, Polycarp, before they executed him, his statement was, see, they gave him the opportunity to recant. And basically, Polycarp said, I've served my Lord for 86 years. How could I now deny him? That's how strong his faith was. There were other players in this church. There were the Jews, of course. The people that were supposed to represent God to the rest of the world. It wasn't that Jews were anything special. It's just that God chose this nation, the Jewish nation, to be his representatives to everyone else. And the Jews of that day were in opposition to the growing Christian church that Polycarp was over, and that had started there in the city of Smyrna. It was a pagan city. There was all kinds of other deities and temples and all of those types of things there. So there were leaders in the church. There were martyrs there. There were the Jews who were against the church. There were the Romans. And they didn't care what you did as long as you said Caesar is Lord and you did the things that they wanted you to do. All the Romans wanted was control. That's all. Just control. Now, unfortunately, in the church of Smyrna, again, they were a highly persecuted church. But the majority of the persecution came from the Jewish people. Listen to what I'm saying. Most of the persecution that Smyrna Christians endured was because of the Jewish people that were already there. And the Jewish people would stir things up and bring it to the Roman government. And basically the Romans didn't have any choice but other than to carry out sentences against their laws. The Jewish people were always stirring the pot. They were creating dissension. They were talking. They were misleading. They were misrepresenting God. And they were talking about these early Christians like they were the enemy. Now the early Christians, they would gather in homes, and that's where they did their church, in these little home churches. And they called them love feasts. That's what they were known as, love feasts. The reason was because they would gather and they would talk about God's love for them. God's love for the people that trusted in him and how he had sent his Messiah to come and to redeem us. They talked about that love that Jesus showed when he was here. And then the feast part, it was like a potluck. You would come to a house church to worship and to talk about God and God's love, and you would always bring something to share. So there was the food part or the feast part, and they always celebrated communion. And these Jewish leaders in the city, they misrepresented this to the other people there as well as the Romans, and they said that these love feasts were nothing more than wild orgies where they were involved with cannibalism. The reason they said that is because the Christians said that they would drink the body and eat the blood, you know what I mean, of Jesus Christ. And they manipulated it. And they changed it. And they were misrepresenting it to the masses. The persecution that this church was enduring came from the Jewish people. Because they were all about themselves and they were not about Jesus and what Jesus was all about. Or what Jesus was trying to do. To the angel of the church in Smyrna, write these words. Of him who was first and last, who died and came back to life. I know your afflictions. I know your poverty, yet you are rich. Jesus is once again announcing, I am God. I have power over life and I have power over death. He says, but your discipleship, there is a cost. It will cost you your family, friends. Maybe it'll cost you your will, your time, and your money. All of your efforts. He says it'll cost you just about everything that there is in your life. And he was speaking to the church of Smyrna. Because all of these Jews are against you. They are telling people that you're a bunch of cannibals. You meet in people's houses and you have wild orgies. And can you imagine the way that the culture and the average person shied away from them? Well, nobody would want to do business with them anymore. Nobody would want to sell things to them anymore. Where did they get their food? How did they sell their products? How did they find work? They weren't. And Jesus says, yet you are rich. I'm like, what? Are you nuts? What does persecution look like today in our world? You ever think about that? And as Jesus says, yet you are rich. We don't know what persecution is. We really don't. Persecution here in Rosebush, Michigan is when we feel, I don't know if I want to talk to my next door neighbor about my faith. I don't know if I want to bring up a subject to someone that might not want to hear it. I don't know if I want to be offensive to somebody. You know, we're not persecuted in the same way that others are persecuted. The way that the early church was persecuted. Ours is more of a persecution of decision. We live in a free land where we can make those choices freely and openly. We can worship whatever we want. Jesus calls us to share the good news of His salvation with other people. And yet, as the video you saw in the beginning of the service, rarely do we do that. In the Sudan, there was a house church that was meeting on a regular basis. The government told them to disband, to discontinue. They refused. Well, weeks went by, a few weeks turned into a month or so, and one day when they were worshiping in this house church, the military police showed up. They went in during the middle of the service. They told everybody to sit down. They were armed with guns. And they went up front and they took the cross off of the wall. And they put it outside on the steps leading out of the church, out of this home. And they went back inside and they told the congregation that was gathered there, they said, you will leave this place and you will leave it now. And when you leave, you step on the cross on your way out. It was a sign of their rejection. That day, every person that was gathered there stepped on the cross, except for one 14-year-old girl. She was then put before a firing squad. True story. You see, we don't know what real persecution is about here in Rosebush. But Jesus calls each and every one of us to have the strength and the perseverance and the fortitude and all that we can muster in order to represent Him well to not only ourselves and our own families and our community, but to others, to any opportunity that He gives to us. We are called to be His witnesses to a world that really doesn't want to hear it. They don't want to hear about Jesus. The world wants to hear about control. Jesus is all about letting go. We always have to ask ourselves the question, is my faith as deep as I think it is? You see, one of the things about this is you find out real quick how deep your faith is. You find out really quick. But when you live on the other side and everything is hunky-dory, it's all about being you, Jesus. And yet, how many times do we fail in our own personal witness to another person? No, I do. I admit it. I'm not always on track. But that's no excuse. Jesus sends these letters to the churches and really places them in the Bible so that all of His children will look at the issues that He's revealing, that He's talking about. The church of Ephesus that we talked about last week, Well, does anybody remember what his complaint was with them? You've lost your first love. He said, you've been doing all these churchy things. You know, you look like Christians, but the reason you're doing them is not because of your love for me. It's because you've just been doing stuff. And he says, I hold this against you. And he tells that church, he says, if you don't straighten your act out, then I'm going to remove your lampstand from where I am, and you will no longer be associated with me. He doesn't say that to the church of Smyrna. He doesn't say, I hold this against you. He commends them. He encourages them to persevere, to keep going. And he talks about how Satan will put some of you in jail or in prison for 10 days or a time period, and you will be tested. You see, the church of Smyrna and the persecution that they went through is all about testing the depth of their faith and knowing how deep their faith was. And he says, even unto the point of death, that's how far you might have to go. That's how deep your faith in me needs to be. I want you to notice something. Again, Jesus doesn't say, I hold anything against you. He doesn't. But he also doesn't stop Satan. Remember, the Bible talked about synagogue of Satan? That was all centered around all the slander that the Jews were creating. The Jews were talking about these love feasts, and they were talking about, you know, how negative and how, you know, unholy, and all these things about the Christian early believers. He was painting a very negative picture, or they were. And Jesus says this type of slander is no more than a synagogue of Satan. I know one thing. I don't think Jesus likes slanderous talk. So again, something for you and I to consider. Is my conversation always holy? Is it always something that I can be proud of? Do I miss the boat sometimes? How deep is my faith? Am I willing to go to the extent that many before me have gone? Even if it means my very life. What about my will? What about my goals and dreams and aspirations? Am I willing to sacrifice those? Watch this.